I would like to welcome all of you very warmly to the talk today in the series of the International Interfaith Reading Group on Manuscripts in Interfaith Contexts. My name is Ulrike Rösler and I'm teaching Tibetan and Himalayan studies at the University of Oxford. And I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to chair today's event. It's a real privilege and pleasure to introduce the speaker and the topic today. So this evening, Charles Manson will give a presentation titled Serendipitous Manuscripts, Karma Pakshi's Memoirs, Past Lives and Poetry. His talk will take us to Tibet and to Mongolia and introduce the 13th century Buddhist master Karma Pakshi. Charles will tell us about his discovery of previously unknown manuscripts related to Karma Pakshi and how they have led to new and unexpected insights into the religious life of Tibet more than 700 years ago. So, what is special about Tibetan Buddhism and about Karma Pakshi? All Buddhists share the belief in reincarnation, but Tibetan Buddhism is unique in directly applying this belief to determine the leadership succession of Buddhist and sometimes also secular institutions. Important Buddhist leaders are expected to be reborn, to be identified, and to take on the social and religious roles of their previous incarnation. The most well-known example is probably the Dalai Lama institution, which has shaped Tibetan religious life and politics over almost 400 years. Apart from the Dalai Lamas, Tibet has a significant number of other Buddhist incarnation lineages, and these reincarnate lamas have played important roles as religious teachers and scholars or authors, as heads of monastic institutions, and often also as diplomats and negotiators. Today's talk will take us straight back to the beginnings of the system of reincarnate Tibetan lamas. Karma Pakshi is considered the second in the incarnation line of the Karma path. His recognition as the reincarnation of his predecessor is regarded as the beginning of the system of institutional incarnation lineages in Tibetan Buddhism. Due to his religious status, Karma Pakshi was invited to the Mongol court, where he became a Buddhist teacher of the ruling Khan, but was imprisoned by the Khan's successor. Charles Manson has been researching the life and writings of this important Buddhist master for many years. In the process, he discovered rare manuscripts that shed new light on the life and spirituality of Karma Pakshi and on the idea of reincarnation itself. These manuscripts are thus of fundamental importance to our understanding of central themes in interfaith studies, such as the difficult issue of the relationship between religion and secular power, or conceptions of the afterlife, and in the case of reincarnate lamas, not just the afterlife, but also the individual's previous lives. Our speaker, Charles Manson, has plenty of experience working with manuscripts since he works as a librarian for the Tibetan Collections at the Bodleian Library in Oxford and at the British Library in London. Earlier in his life, he was a master woodcarver in London and then spent several years as a Buddhist monk and meditation retreatant. He later studied at Harvard University, where he received a master's in theological studies. Charles has recently published a book on the second Karma Pakshi, which has received enthusiastic reviews. If you're interested in Karma Pakshi or in the idea of reincarnation or in Tibetan Buddhism more broadly, I very much recommend this fascinating book. And you can find it on the website of Shambhala Publications. Charles, I now hand over to you. We look very much forward to hearing about the manuscripts you found and what they tell us about Karma Pakshi and his times.
Thank you very much, Ulrike. And thank you to Thea as well for the invitation. And welcome to everybody. good evening for some, good afternoon for others, and even perhaps good morning. Traditional Zoom greeting. And I shall now share a PowerPoint, if that's okay. And hopefully we've tested it, so it should work fine. And then I'll just talk through as the pictures are brought up. So if you can bear with me a second while I do this. Well, the title, Serendipitous Manuscripts, not easy to say, really refers to the three manuscripts that mostly informed this book, and well, the ones that I relied on more closely, although I did use later publications, Tibetan publications, quite a bit as well. But even those would often use these primary manuscripts too. So I think it's best to really just focus on those. The other ones, the later ones, I haven't seen any manuscripts of them. They're all printed works, but these ones are handwritten. And it comes in this book that I've written. Came out in November, and yeah, so far it's as Ulrika has kindly said, it's been reasonably well received. I'm waiting for the bad reviews. Yes. So firstly, I'd like to give some context and then talk a little bit about the texts themselves, and then something about either, you could call it legacy, I suppose, but also maybe some of the, a few quotations that might be relevant in the interfaith context of quotations from Karma Pakshi himself. So firstly, the geographical context, and oh yes, here we are. This is the arena in which Karma Pakshi operated. So he was born near Derge in East Tibet, just northwest of Derge, and he spent half his life in that area in East Tibet. But then he went across to Tserpu. He then came up to northern China, went up to Karakoram, across to Almalik and Kucha, and then again across to Xanadu or Shangdu, and even a bit further northeast. I posit anyway. I'm not entirely sure of that. Beijing hadn't really been created yet, but I've just marked it in there. And Shigatse is not relevant to him either, but it just gives some markers. So just very briefly, some of you will already know Tibetan history quite well, but if I can give a very sort of few points about it, that there was an empire for 200 years. You can see the dates there from 630 roughly to 642. It collapsed with the assassination of Langdama, the central authority. And then there was in terms of, this is when Buddhism sort of properly came first to Tibet. And then it, as far as we know, it dissipated somewhat. Certainly there was no royal court backing for it. And then a couple of, well, 150 years later, they begin what is being called rekindling the embers of the Buddhist tradition in Tibet. And many translators either coming from India or going from Tibet into India and then back sort of managed the transference of Tibetan, of Buddhist texts to Tibet and translating them into Tibetan. And then monasteries began to be established as well. And more widely, we have down south in around about 1204, well, in 1204, we have the invasion of northern India. So that signifies, symbolically perhaps, a sort of lessening of Buddhist influence in India. And we have also further north the death of Genghis Khan. in 1227. And that's part of the Mongolian empire spreading. It then spread further with his sons, and indeed his grandsons, who are important to Karma Pakshi. So this is the extent of the Tibetan Empire shortly before it dissipated. So it's really quite a large area, not a big population, but a large area. And these are the monasteries after the Buddhist Dharma had become rekindled. The earliest, I've just taken a sample of them here. The earliest is Turling, established in 997. The latest here is Tsopu in 1189. So that's a 200-year period, and you're getting quite a few monasteries. There are more, but I just chose these ones to mark. This one on the east, Katok, is particularly important to Karma Pakshi as well. It's where he received his education, or some of his education, as we shall see. And then to go, if you've got Katok, if you remember that there's Katok here on East Tibet. And to zoom in a bit, there's Derge, as we've seen. And this is Karmagern, Kampon Nenan, and Pangpuk. They're the three monasteries besides Katok that were very important to Karma Pakshi. He took his education at Katok, and he later took over these three monasteries when in middle age, really, when he beginning to expand his activity. He spent quite a lot of time near Batang in retreat, and he went as far south as Markham, and indeed right down to the furthest south he went was Kawakapo, a famous mountain. Still not climbed, apparently. So he was born in 1204, could be said to be 1206, in northwest of Dege, and this is a picture of his what's reckoned to be his birthplace. And he was a precocious child. He was able to read fairly quickly, living in a community on the sides of the Yangtze River up in the highlands of Tibet. And after some years, at age 11, he decided to go to central Tibet in order to further his education. And but he didn't get quite so far. He got towards Chamdo, and just south of Chamdo, he met someone called Pomdrakpa. And Pomdrakpa invited him to stay with him just for the day, sort of thing. And that evening, he gave an initiation. And during the initiation, this Pomdrakpa was in his 30s or 40s. He said to Karma Pakshi, "I've had a vision of you and being as a reincarnation of Dusum Khenpa." So Dusum Khenpa was quite a while before. This is 1193, he died. We're now talking somewhere in the 1215 or so. He had been the teacher of the teacher of Pomdrakpa. So it's like 2 or 3 generations beforehand. And it was indicated to Karma Pakshi as a child that he was a reincarnation of this saint, I think you could call Dusum Khenpa. And then we have, this is a student, this is Drogon Rechen, the student of Dusum Khenpa, and this is Pomdrakpa, the student of Drogon Rechen. So we've got the lineage going like that, but there's quite a distance between Karma Pakshi and Dusum Khenpa. Later, the incarnations, notably, are from dead person to child almost immediately, well, very shortly anyway. This is quite unusual at the beginning. So Karma Pakshi decided to stay with Pomdrakpa, and he received teaching on the Doha of Saraha, the songs, the King's Doha, the Queen's Doha, and the People's Doha. He received teaching on Mahamudra, the Mahamudra as formalized by Gampopa. And he also received instruction on the introduction to the three kayas, a teaching which it does involve a certain amount of yoga as well. And it became very important to Karma Pakshi later. He indeed taught Kublai Khan and Monga Khan, so he says, his teaching, and he would give it publicly on his travels too. It seemed to be his favorite teaching. So after a little while of studying and meditating with Pomdrakpa, he went to Katok. This is much later, of course, and he received ordination there and more intellectual training there. And Katok is interestingly a Nyingma tradition, and Karma Pakshi is really thought of as being part of the Kagyu or the Kagju, and but he didn't seem to make quite so much distinction between it. And in fact, in his works, they're peppered with references to Nyingma tantras as well as Kagyu later tantras. After being in Katok, he went back to Pomdrakpa, south of Chamdo, and they proceeded to go down to Markham. And he says that they were avoiding Mongol invasion. So there seem to have been some difficulties with Mongol soldiers in this area, and so they decided to go further south to avoid them. Not known whether they had direct contact or whether it was just a sort of precautionary measure. It was at Markham that Pomdrakpa died, and Karma Pakshi became somewhat despondent about this, not knowing what to do. And eventually, he went into retreat in near Batam, in quite a remote area. These ruins purport to be the buildings that he stayed in, well, he created and stayed in a place called Pungri, just northeast of Batam. He stayed there for 11 years, meditating. He gained something of a reputation. He was now, getting towards his 40s, and many people started to come to him for teaching and to meditate with him. As many as 500, it is said. Obviously, quite a few anyway. And he developed quite a reputation for his miraculous deeds as well. After 11 years, his closer idea of where Pungri is, you go Batam, you go northeast, and it's up here. You can see it from the road. And there's another angle of the buildings. They're up high. Yeah, quite remote. After retreat, he then proceeded to sort of fulfill, in a way, his connection with Dusun Khenpo. So Dusun Khenpo had founded monasteries at Karmagun, at Kampo Nenang, and at Pampuk. And Karma Pakshi went to these monasteries and either repaired them or else developed them even further. It had been, by this time, it had been almost a century since Dusun Khenpo had founded them. So it was, they had perhaps got somewhat dilapidated and run down, and he was in the process of reviving them. So he went to Kampo Nenang, he went to Pampuk, back to Kampo Nenang, and then up to Karmagun. And it was at Karmagun that he was invited to go to the main monastery that Dusun Khenpo had founded in central Tibet. So he went right across to central Tibet. These are the buildings as they exist now. They got somewhat dilapidated during the Cultural Revolution as well. They've been rebuilt, but it just gives you some idea of the locations there of the three monasteries. And he went to Tsopo. This is before the Cultural Revolution. This picture is taken. But Tsopo would not have been as huge as this, one presumes, at this time. When he got there, this was established in 1189. Dusum Khenpa had died in 1193. So he got there in 1249. This is another 50 years later. And it was it was in ruins, as it's put. And the monks had started drinking as well. So he proceeded to help restore the building and restore the monastic community as well. And he stayed there for a number of years. It ended up being 6 years, after which Kublai Khan invited him to come to meet him in East Tibet. Because meanwhile, in 1255, Kublai Khan had traveled down East Tibet towards Dali, north of Yunnan province, had subjugated the local king there, and was on his way back to North China. And so he invited Karma Pakshi, and after some doubts, Karma Pakshi decided to go, and he went to meet Kublai Khan. I posit that it's somewhere in Qinghai that he met him, rather than further south, but that's open to debate. And initially, he had a good relationship with Kublai Khan at the court. He gave some Buddhist teaching to him and Chabi, his main consort. But after a while, Karma Pakshi had a premonition that things were not going to go well at the court. There was going to be some conflict, and he quite peremptorily just decided to leave, which rather upset Kublai Khan, as we'll see later. He proceeded to go further north a little bit, and in the CCR area, he went traveling and establishing and repairing. You can imagine that with the creation of the Mongol Empire and also the conflict with the Taoist sects as well, that quite a few Buddhist structures had become either willfully harmed or just over time become dilapidated. So he was quite well known for doing repairs. He did build some new structures as well. But he was in the, I've lost my, oh yes, my cursor disappears every now and again, goes AWOL. He was in this area. In fact, he was near Tsongkha. And when messengers arrived from Mongi Khan, who was the Kagan of Khans at the time, and inviting him to come to see him. And so he then traversed the desert, if I can get my cursor back, and went all the way up to, well, at the time, Mongi Khan was near Karakoram. And he met him there, and they had a very good meeting, and he gave him some teaching. Mongi Khan apparently did some meditation, and Karma Pakshi claims that he persuaded Mongi Khan to take up some social policies. If we can, that he would distribute food and wealth from his treasury, and he would repair monasteries. He would make bountiful sky offerings. He without continue to keep his own religion as well as receiving Buddhist initiations. And also he made this request a number of times that he would set free prisoners. These may have been criminals, or they may have been hostages. It's not entirely clear. It's just people who were in prison. And he also apparently persuaded him to prohibit the slaughter of cattle and hunting on certain days of the month, the 8th, the 10th, the 15th, and the 23rd of the lunar month. So it does seem that Karma Pakshi may have been vegetarian, but it doesn't entirely mean that. He certainly persuaded him to Mongi Khan to issue an edict. We have a notice of the edict in other sources that in another source that these killings of animals were stopped on 4 days of the month. This went on for a little while, not for long, because he then set off on his campaign in China. But while they were in Mongolia, this was the situation. He also gave him the Chakra Samvara initiation, in particular, and apparently Mongi Khan did particularly well. He was a particularly adept student at meditation, which is a little bit hard to believe, perhaps. He was a warrior. He had invaded Kiev just 15 years earlier. So he was also engaged in Buddhist meditation. After a while, Mongi Khan decided to continue the campaign that his grandfather had begun against China 30 years earlier, and he went south, gathering his army down into China, and Karma Pakshi left him at this point, and he went across to the Chagatai capital, Almalik, where he wasn't very successful there at the court. Or, well, it would seem so. He doesn't talk much about it. He does mention that the people were at first not very receptive, not the court so much, but the local people. Yeah, it wasn't quite as successful as he had been in Karakoram. And then after a while, he left and proceeded along the silk routes, came down back into North China, and he met Mongi Khan at the Liu Panchan mountains again. And there was a good meeting, and he then told Mongi Khan that he would like to return to Tibet, and they parted amicably, as opposed to with Kublai Khan. But he didn't return just yet, and Mongi Khan went further south, and he died in 1259 of disease. Karma Pakshi was still in this area, and then the civil war broke out between the Khans, Mongi Khan and Kublai Khan, and Kublai Khan saw Karma Pakshi as being something of a threat, perhaps, or anyway, he decided to issue a death warrant against him, perhaps because he'd been so successful up in the court in Karakoram with the very youngest brother, Arik Burki, who was the other Khan who was against Kublai Khan. So we have these two Khans, Kublai and Arik Burki, and Kublai Khan is seeing or saw Karma Pakshi as being allied with Arik Burki. He didn't succeed in killing him, and in fact the executioner himself committed suicide. There were certain miraculous events where he avoided being killed. And then, so Kublai Khan then relented and decided to put him into exile. So Karma Pakshi was then sent to near a lake, an island near a lake, or sorry, an island in a sea. And it may have been either off the coast here, but I posit that it's in a lake up the Dalai Nur, large lake, which has islands. And the description that Karma Pakshi gives of there's a very short description of the area being very desolate, sort of fits it. This is a nice illustration of Shangdu that we have in the Bodleian. Probably didn't look like that. This is what it looks like nowadays. Anyway, the famous the Xanadu of Coleridge's poem. And this is the Dalai Nur Lake, which may well have been where Karma Pakshi spent 2 years in exile, and he continued. He made use of his time there writing, and then after Kublai Khan had established himself as the lead Khan, he defeated Arak Boki. He called Karma Pakshi back to nearby Beijing and imprisoned him again, and Karma Pakshi managed to escape. And when he was then caught and brought to Kublai Khan had a change of heart and asked him to teach him again. But Karma Pakshi, I think, had had enough by then. And he said, no, I'd rather go back to Tibet. And he was given permission. They parted amicably in the end. So it took 8 years going back, all the way back to Tsurphu. He stopped off in East Tibet, built some statues there in these monasteries he'd revived, and came back to Tsurphu, started to sort of ensure that the next reincarnation would be taught the instructions that he had received. He sort of taught an intermediary and asked him, Ugyempa, asked him to find his reincarnation and to teach him when the time came. And 5 years later, he did so, 5 years after Karma Pakshi's death. So Karma Pakshi died in 1283, and sorry, yes, I'm getting, yes, 1283. And you might like to read the account that the third Karmapa, who became his successor, gives in as part of the same series that the Karma Pakshi book is in. Ruth Gamble has kindly translated a piece where the third Karmapa describes his passage through the intermediary state between the two Karmapas. So it's very interesting. If you're interested in the between deaths, between death and birth period. So in my volume, I give certain translations here, excerpts. Mostly I've relied on the Karma Pakshi memoirs here. It's 80 folios, three main texts. The first text is then divided into 5 parts. So in effect, you've got 7 parts, I suppose. But the 3 main texts here. The text itself, the manuscript, this is a reproduction, as you can see, and this is really only what we have to work with at present. Because the text itself, as far as I can ascertain, is in Rumtek, and there are political difficulties with getting to the treasures of the monastery. This is in Sikkim. I've tried, and I also thought the text may have gone to Gantok when it was being reproduced in 1978, but as far as I know, it came back to Rumtek. Sometimes texts that were loaned, they went to Delhi and then were reproduced. They didn't make their way back, I'm told, but as far as I know, it's still at Rumtek. So I haven't actually been able to see it, but the black here, certainly on the covers here, this is the covers of the 3 texts, is black, and the white is silver. I have had an account of somebody who actually saw it in the 70s, and he remembered, although he was a child, he remembers it as being silver ink on black. And then later on, that's just the beginning parts. Later on, the text is in black as normal black ink on white paper. So if we can just briefly look at the texts, I just call them text A, B, and C. It's completely informal. That the illustrations there, It's Amitayus and Mahakaruna. They're particularly important to Karma Pakshi, these deities. This is the title as I've translated it. Each one of these texts starts with "From the collected works of Mahasiddha Karma Pakshi, My Life Story," and then the actual title. Slightly flowery, perhaps, effulgent light, annihilating poison. Quite a bit of this first text is in poetry, actually. In fact, the first two parts are. And then there's another part, which is very interesting, talking about him building a statue. He had a dream while he was on the Silk Road of a huge statue of a Buddha, and the Buddha spoke to him, the Buddha statue, and said that he should build a statue the same size as him, and he was 10 fathoms high, 60 feet or so. So he did actually build this in Sopo. It got destroyed during the Cultural Revolution, unfortunately, and we don't have any photographs, even though Richardson was photographing in the area before the revolution. And so part of this this text does have an account, quite elaborate account of how he set about building it out of iron, and the difficulties that they had, the obstacles, and his belief and thoughts on the effects of consecration. He was very keen on consecration and the effects that it has, extols them. And then there's some degree of sort of historical matter in this first text as well. It's interspersed with his own sort of musings, so you couldn't really call it an autobiography. It's more of that's why I've called it a memoir. So text B, a dissertation on realizing the unity of all time and timelessness, and on perfecting great potentiality. This has quite a bit of historical material in it, and it does discuss his pre-incarnations to a certain degree. He doesn't give many in his memoirs. They're given in another text, as we shall see. And the yes, and then the third text is the introduction to oral teaching on realizing conascent wisdom or gnosis, I suppose. This is a bit more philosophical. It's got some quite difficult to understand philosophical musings in this text. So thirdly, in 2010, I found this is in East Tibet, a pre-incarnations manuscript. This is the location at Palpum Monastery. It's quite near to Derge. And the manuscript was actually sort of incognito in amongst manuscripts in a Lama's kitchen. And I happened to be looking through them one evening. I was sleeping in the kitchen and looking through them, and found a part of this manuscript here, which has a piece which I don't think, well, nobody had published anything at the time, and I'm not sure that many people knew of it. It had a reasonably short text, which gives some of his, well, it purports to give, it's not directly from him, but it's recorded by a student of the third Karmapa, but it's said that it comes directly from Karma Pakshi himself, the recalling of 17 previous incarnations. So the author is Yeshe Gyaltsen, is student of the third Karmapa, 19 folios, and with 2 illustrations on the title page. And I just give 2 examples. here at line 2, it says, "We heard this from the precious Lord Jetson's mouth." So that the author claims that it was heard from Karma Pakshi's tales himself. He does mention in Karma Pakshi in his memoir that he doesn't like to talk too much about previous incarnations because it becomes almost like too much information. And also he's not sure, he say himself, he's not sure that people will believe him. So he does give a certain amount, but he says, "I can remember an awful lot, but I don't like to talk about it too much." And this is just in the colophon here that Yeshe Gyaltsen wrote on line 6, wrote the text originally. He didn't write the manuscript necessarily, but it's a copy of what was originally written by Yeshe Gyaltsen. And so the incarnations, they run, the ones that are given in this particular text, they run from the time of Shakyamuni Buddha up to the 12th century, to just before Karma Pakshi himself. And the pre-incarnations are largely religious figures, either yogin or monk, but sometimes he says that he was royalty as well. He actually does give within this text 4 current incarnations. So there's himself and 3 others as well, one of whom is a woman. Interestingly, so they're co-incarnations, so to speak, and then 3 future incarnations, 2 highly realized beings, and 1 is to be a Buddha. He's reckoned to be a future Buddha as well. And then during lockdown, would you believe, the publication got delayed, and so I, musing about, I then found that actually online there had been published in 2015 a reproduction, again within a 3-volume piece, more about philosophy, and you wouldn't expect this to be in it, but I found this in it. And not only that, but actually All Souls College had it at Oxford, had the reproduction, the printed reproduction. It was reproduced in Chengdu, and they had got it for the philosophy aspect. Somebody had asked for it. It had been extremely expensive, so they weren't aware that they had the poems of Karma Pakshi, his Vajra songs, sort of songs of realization. And there are more than 40 songs in there. This is All Souls, the library just off to left here. And the 36 follow, 59 songs, yes, I counted them last night. I thought there was just 40, but rather more. Just 2 illustrations on the title page. And I've translated, I think, a dozen of the songs from this in the book, so you might like to look. In the colophons, they often refer to Lama Tsopo, meaning Karma Pakshi, but they don't give much detail. So where I've put the poems in the book, I've done a little bit of a guessing game where what the song is talking about is relevant to that stage in his life. So I've taken a bit of liberty there, unfortunately, but I think hopefully it works all right. And it also meant that I was able to work on this during all those lockdowns to actually include them in the publication, because the publication got delayed. Oops. And there are many references, well, quite a few references to Saraha. Quite interestingly, he seems to have had been inspired quite a bit by Saraha. So Karma Pakshi, I think mostly I would say that his legacy is largely to do with the beginning of the reincarnation process, the lineage that began, and then the whole idea really spread very quickly throughout Tibet and parts of Inner Asia too. But also the in terms of the in the 19th century, some of you may know the Rime movement, the sometimes translated as non-sectarian movement, and some of the writers that are important to that movement hark back to Karma Pakshi as being quite influential in the ideas that they were discussing. So I think in terms of the sort of interfaith context, we could also say that he has some relevance there. And I've got a couple of quotes here, which I hope may be of interest. This is rather antagonistic. I mean, he was a preacher. You know, he was seeking to convert people in his own way. But he does mention that when he was at the court of Kublai Khan, with the Guyapati, the Vajrapani, a very fierce stare or glare, he overcame the non-Buddhist opposition. This was in a debate situation, and overawed the heretical infidels, and he extolled widely the Buddha teaching. So that's rather non-interfaith, although, yeah, it's interfaith, but in a slightly negative way. In the context of discussing the realization of what he refers to as the self-aware wisdom that is aware of one's own ignorance, although there are many drops of water, when they merge into a great ocean, each one is not individual. And so that's quite a nice, I feel anyway, quote that about how, although there's great separation, many drops of water, when they are merged, when a drop of water realizes wisdom, so the individual realizes wisdom in the great ocean, then they're not individual. He's also referring to the true nature of the mind, which is inherent within each individual too. And then using an example of the inherent oil in mustard seeds, the individual seeds and yet one oil when they are crushed or processed, the nature of the mind is unchanging, hence it is completely perfected in not being non-pervasive. In other words, it is pervasive and not being mixed. So it's both pervasive and yet it doesn't get altered itself. It's unchanging. So there's a sort of, yeah. And that is the meaning of all are connected with one essence, which one might think of as being sort of economical or interfaith sentiment, shall we say. And then regarding the saying that if one is aware of the one thing, one is aware of all. If one is, meaning the nature of the mind he's referring to it. If one is not aware of the one is not aware of everything. So he then explains, if one is aware of the unchanging nature of one's own mind and comprehends it, one realizes the gnosis which is self-aware of all phenomena of samsara and nirvana. And as a result, one will become enlightened. He then goes on to say, if one is not aware of the nature of the mind, one will continue to suffer, as most beings do. I would then just like to recommend for interfaith people, scholars and students, that there is a text written by, it doesn't feature much in my book, it's known as the Mogul Dingri text, and it has within it a discussion of theism. And Professor Capstein has written an elegant article on this. There's a reference to it. He does at one point, it's not his conclusion, but at one point he says, in short, if Karma Pakshi's interest in theism was due to his meeting living Christian theists, his response to their beliefs was firmly cast in the mold of the Indian Buddhist traditions in which he had been schooled. So when he was in Karakoram and Mongolia, he did meet Christians, well, he says so, and it doesn't mention, it must have met Muslim as well, just because of being at Karakoram, but also when he went to the Chagatai capital. But he seems to have engaged mostly with the Christian, and he then does write this whole volume, quite a lengthy volume, discussing theism. But of course, he wouldn't have known, perhaps, well, not of course, but he probably wouldn't have known much about the, oh, I see I've written wrongly, Mughal instead of Mongol, my apologies. The Christian subtleties of theism, or indeed Islam, but the he would have perhaps been writing from his knowledge of theism, from the Indian Buddhist tradition, which he had been trained in. So it may not be, but it might be of interest. I don't know. As an argument against it. Unfortunately, it hasn't been translated, and nobody at present is working on it much. Although there is somebody I'm hoping will do soon. We'll see if the fish bites. And he, as I say, he had a lack of success in the Chagatai court. So he doesn't, because it was sympathetic to Islam, and but he doesn't mention much about it at all, Islam itself, unfortunately. So there we are. There's Karma Pakshi and the three texts, his memoirs, his pre-incarnations, and the songs as well. The songs text, although I've translated a few of them, only about 20%. I'm working on them, well, when I can, and hopefully they will be published at some time. I'm hoping there may be some more thoughts on that might be relevant to interfaith considerations as well.
Thank you so much, Charles.
There we go.
That was fascinating, and I'm sure there will be a lot of interest in hearing more about certain aspects of your talk today. Mm-hmm. I also see that Thea has very kindly put the link to the publication of the book into the chat. So if anyone is interested to read more about these themes, then that is also easy to do. Yeah. So thank you very much. If you have any questions or comments, you could either put them in the chat. I'll keep my eyes on the chat, or you could also use this raise your hand function in order to indicate that you would like to speak. And I think normally we would finish at 7, but I imagine we might want to give ourselves a few more minutes if there are more questions, so that we have a bit of time for discussion as well. Then I would like to thank you all very much for attending, and I would like to thank Charles once again for a fascinating lecture about a fascinating life. Thank you. Before we all leave the meeting, I should also announce the next talk, and that's going to be on the 13th of March. And Dr. Nick Poske will speak about the material and linguistic history of Arabic manuscripts in Muslim and Jewish contexts. So that's the next one. And have a very good evening or morning or wherever you are. So thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Thank you.